Hello and welcome to the Bitcoin Butlers podcast. I am Mike Watkins, and with me, as always, is my good friend and business partner, Matt Burke.
Hello.
And while we will be continuing our series on sovereign inheritance planning, moving forward, much of our content will be focused on the news of the past week and how that news affects the future outlook for Bitcoin.
That's right. And when we talk about the outlook, we're not really talking about Bitcoin as an investment or the price of Bitcoin per se. We're really talking about what developments are happening within the Bitcoin world and within society at large that is really driving the platform and the technology forward. So with that, let's jump into it. We got some headlines to put up on the screen here. The first one is nation state adoption. Two announcements coming out of two different parts of the world this week. The first one is the Central African Republic has announced that they've adopted Bitcoin as an official currency. It is now legal tender in the Central African Republic. And Panama has approved or is in the process of approving a bill that will allow Bitcoin and 8 other cryptocurrencies to be used without limitation, is the wording that they used in the bill. But basically that means that you can pay your taxes with Bitcoin. You can spend Bitcoin and not pay any capital gains tax. And that goes for these 8 other crypto assets as well that they've included in this bill. So Michael, what do you think about these developments?
Well, first of all, the Panama one has not been signed by the president of the country yet, and that could be vetoed. So we don't know what's going to happen there. However, I think all of it is positive for Bitcoin. So starting with the Central African Republic, this is a country I didn't even know existed before this happened. And I was born in Africa. So it's obviously a very tiny country. It doesn't, I don't think most people have actually heard of it. Maybe people who are really into geography or, maybe they've sent someone to the Olympics one time in their history. I'm not sure. But what I am seeing from these smaller countries like El Salvador, Central African Republic, is that they're trying to change the trajectory for their country. So El Salvador wanted to attract digital nomads. They want to attract business to their country. They want to spur economic development in their country. And I think, and I'm speaking for them, I don't know for sure, that they thought that Bitcoin could help them get there, that they could be we'll call it the Central American capital for this. And I think that other countries have seen this, and I would say that, to me, the move by the Central African Republic is similar to El Salvador, except they're not trying to do it in Central America. They're doing it in Central Africa. So it's a country that doesn't really have its own currency, right? There's no central bank.
They're tied to the Central African franc, which is there are several countries in Africa that are tied to that currency, and because of that, they haven't really had their own currency or central bank.
Yeah, and so I think that we could see that I would expect to see that from other countries that don't have their own central bank, that are using someone else's currency. It's easy for them to jump in here and do this. They don't have the same kind of hoops and hurdles that a very large country with a lot of international trade would have to go through for this. So for me, I see all these small countries adopting it and sort of at a pretty fast rate at this point as very positive news.
Yeah, I think overall it is very positive news. I think maybe my enthusiasm is tempered just a little bit on this one. I mean, you've got a country that is not, it's an undeveloped country. I think I saw that the GDP per capita is less than $500 a year. So you're talking about, the average person there makes less than $10 a week. There is very little imports and exports. They just have a very basic, antiquated economy. The from what I understand, their military presence is a lot of Russian mercenaries. It's an underdeveloped country. It has a long way to go before it's really got a place on the world stage. And so, while I think it is really interesting to see countries recognizing that they can use, stateless, permissionless, unconfiscatable money as their legal tender, I think that shows some really bold thinking on their part. I do wonder a little bit how meaningful it really is, for a country of that size and with that place in the world. I mean, I think the other thing I saw was that they've had a civil war internally for almost 10 years. It's
Mm.
been ongoing. So it's not particularly stable. So again, while I see it as positive news, I just want to be, somewhat cautious about getting too excited about countries making Bitcoin legal tender when it really may or may not have a significant impact on the rest of the world and on Bitcoin for that matter.
Yeah, and I have a slightly different view of it. And one of the things that I used to think was really fascinating was the history of the 4 minute mile. So people thought for years and years, maybe decades, that it was just impossible for a human to ever run a mile in under 4 minutes. Just couldn't be done. And then uh, Roger Bannister did it. And I don't know the exact year. I probably should have looked that up before the show. But when he did it, within a few months, uh, dozens of other runners did it. So it went from something that was impossible to do, like people literally thought that it was just physically impossible for a human to do it. And then once people saw that one person was able to do it, all of a sudden other people said, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And I have a similar view with Bitcoin with these smaller countries, in that someone sees that one country did it, and if they can do it, then why can't I do it? And I think that kind of thinking in some ways is part of the game theory of Bitcoin. I don't know if you agree or disagree. That's kind of part of Bitcoin's game theory.
I do agree with that, and I do think that and maybe if we were going to put a theme on this week's news recap, it might be baby steps. There's a lot of I think little things that each of them are um, maybe not hugely significant, but they're all meaningful movements forward in the world of Bitcoin. So I do agree with you that any small advancement is an advancement, and that it does give other people impetus to take that risk when maybe they wouldn't have, because it's that the type of thing where you see somebody else doing it and now you think maybe it's okay for you to do it. And I don't know if you saw the video that was going around Twitter last week with the one guy dancing at the festival.
Hmm.
um you know
Well-known
and
video, sure.
yeah, well-known video. And so you got the one guy dancing, and finally another guy comes over, and before you know it, the entire festival is dancing with the one guy who had been dancing by himself. And so I think that there is certainly no reason uh, to discount what's happened in that regard. I would say maybe the only place we disagree is how significant it is,
So
and
I'm
maybe, and frankly, I do have concerns about the types of governments that are going to be adopting Bitcoin. So that's another area of this where maybe I'm a little more skeptical, is that when you have a country who's been in a civil war for 10 years, who doesn't really have any infrastructure to begin with. I think 11% of the country has internet access, and like another maybe 20% of the country has phone access. So they're pretty remote. They're pretty isolated. Um, and it sounds like, given the amount of civil unrest that they have there, uh, I don't know that if every country that was that unstable were the ones to decide to adopt Bitcoin, then is that really what's best for Bitcoin?
Well, that we would have to see just sort of how that plays out. But I've seen new things come along before, in our lifetime. We've seen a number of new things come along, and the one that's been the most impactful for me, that I was the most involved with, was the iPhone. I remember watching the announcement from Steve Jobs. I was in line the day the iPhone came out. I had one on that first day, and I remember how many people said it will never work because it doesn't have buttons. How am I supposed to type an email? I'm supposed to type something out with this on-screen keyboard. And even after the iPhone was introduced, a number of their competitors tried to merge the two. So I know BlackBerry did it. I know Palm did it, where they had a touchscreen device with like a slide out keyboard. The point being that those companies were still trying to stay in the past. They initially thought that Apple coming out with a device that had no buttons, that was touchscreen only, would never work for people typing out work emails or even just texting friends, whatever it is. And within 18 months, there probably weren't any devices that were sold with a physical keyboard. Actually, that's not true. BlackBerry kept it for a little while, but
They hung on for a while.
they just disappeared. They went from trying to emulate it in some way to saying, okay, well, for those people that really still want to type on plastic keys, here's our device. So I see it much the same way that you talked about that video where just there's this guy, he's just dancing a crazy dance in a field, you know, and all of a sudden one person joins in, and after that one person joins in, no one really joins in for a little while. And then a
Yeah.
third person comes in and it starts to escalate. And there is a type of inertia I think you get from this, that all of a sudden people are doing it. It doesn't seem crazy when the next person does it. So going back to that video of that person dancing, the first person up there dancing by themselves looks like a lunatic.
Hmm.
The second person, when they get up there, the second person doesn't look like a lunatic. To me, they kind of look like another person. It's not quite as crazy as the first person, but they both look a bit silly. But once you get to like four people up there, then they don't look crazy at all. And then at the end of that video where everyone's dancing except some people are sitting down, it's the people that are sitting down that look crazy.
Right.
So change is hard. People don't handle change very well. They just don't. They think they do. They think they like change. Most people, do not like change. And they view the change based they view the change based on how they perceive things right now. They don't really have much of an imagination to see where it goes. So while I think you and I agree that the Central African Republic is, I don't know how many countries are in the world, 190, 195, something like that. They're in the bottom 10, almost certainly, right? They're probably in the bottom 5. So it's not a great country. But the part that I thought was interesting is that they want to step up. They want to be a better country. And I think another thing we can't rule out is simply the ego of the rulers of these countries. Because, in some circles, Nayib Bukele is sort of like a folk hero, right? He's an icon of sorts. And El Salvador has never been more in the news than it is now, as far as, things that aren't terrible, and gangs and
Right.
bullshit.
Other than murder, it's not
Right,
typically been in the news
right.
a whole lot.
So I think it's definitely elevated the status of El Salvador. And there's always been a thought that game theory, other countries would join in. And we're starting to see it to the point now where we're judging how big of a deal that city came on board. So I know at Bitcoin conference, we had a couple of cities that came on board. And I think people were generally a bit disappointed. I don't know if you agree or disagree on that.
Yeah, I think there was some expectation that it was going to be some major announcement that you were going to get, a big country announcing that they were doing something
Right.
very significant. And so again, with this idea that it's been, there's been some baby steps, and I think the Panama thing is as well.
So, so
And so I, when you take in, if you take each of these events by themselves, maybe they're not that big of a deal. But when you take the Central African Republic and you take, what looks like a bill in Panama that could change the landscape there, you've got El Salvador, you've got these economic zones, the one that's being set up off the coast of Honduras, you've got Madeira off the coast of Portugal. All of these things are individually not that significant, but collectively shows that you've got real strides being made in terms of how people are viewing this, and the fact that they just that we're creating safe places for Bitcoin, I think, is really what I see as the most significant aspect of it.
yeah, I think that's really wise. That it's you could I don't know how you feel about this, but it's almost like these small countries and these cities that are adopting it are greater than the sum of their parts as far as the impact for Bitcoin.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
And now we have
Um,
like heading to the Panama news. The Panama news is interesting because it's not just Bitcoin. 8 other cryptos, or 8 other whatever you call it, digital assets, and one of them I thought was pretty strange. But so I don't view the Panama announcement the same way that I view the Central African Republic announcement, even though Panama is certainly a bigger country. I think there's something interesting there where they're viewing it more. I'm going to call it the global crypto ecosystem, where they don't just
well,
want to do Bitcoin, but 9 different
y-
coins.
yeah. Well, here's how I see it with Panama. And I probably know a little bit more about this now than I did because a friend of mine just got back from a trip to Panama. But they really derive a huge portion of their GDP comes from basically tolls for the canal. So one thing I thought that was interesting about the Panama piece is that, I wonder how much of that is them setting themselves up so that as more people are using Bitcoin or other crypto potentially in commerce, they want to be able to accept it as a payment for a ship going through the canal. And those payments can be really significant. They can be, easily $100,000 or more kind of thing. There's, millions of dollars going through that canal every day. So I think, maybe there's somewhat of a preemptive type of move on their part, saying, okay, we want to be poised to where if somebody says, I want to pay my toll in Bitcoin, we can accept it and not have to worry about what that means in terms of, tax implications or the ability to actually accept that payment.
Yeah, I think that what we're seeing here, as I kind of step away from it and try and look at it from like 30,000 feet, is that this, what I'm going to call like magic internet money or whatever you want to call it, people say crypto, is it money? People didn't really view it. People kind of viewed it maybe more like a toy or a collectible or just some kind of goofy thing that people were just kind of messing around with. And now you're starting to see countries, particularly Panama, say, "Okay, well, we welcome it. We are happy to take payment in a number of these cryptocurrencies." They understand full well that they can take that and convert it very easily to fiat money, any fiat money of their choice. So I think they see that this is something that it's a country that recognizes that these cryptocurrencies have value. And when I say cryptocurrencies, I don't mean Bitcoin. Bitcoin and those cryptocurrencies have value, and they're happy to take your money.
Right.
It doesn't matter to them. I've been to foreign countries before where you can go to a store and you probably pay 3 or 4 different currencies.
Mm-hmm.
They don't care. I mean, they know there's an exchange, and if you're willing to buy their goods that they have in there, and the only thing you have on you is dollars, and that's not the currency of that country, they don't care. They're happy to take it. Actually, historically, they're
In
very
many
happy to
cases.
take dollars, right? But I think we're going to see that as things move to be more and more digital. I think it'd be reasonable to go into a store and maybe they take, I'm gonna make up a number here, 15 to 20 different currencies. Some of them may be fiat, some of them may be digital. Some stores may have more, some may accept more, some may accept less. But there's something changing in the world that we all just going to have to accept, which is that the things that we thought were money, and I'm going to always use 7 years. The things we thought were money 7 years ago, the things that people are taking for money today are very different than things that people thought were money 7 years ago. I never would have imagined this. I don't know about you. Would you have imagined that like Panama would take not just Bitcoin, but like a range of other coins?
Well, it's arguable whether those other coins are money or not, but that's a different discussion.
Money, well,
So,
I'd say value is a better way of putting it.
yeah.
They have value to them. Look, I uh I would actually be happier if Panama was Bitcoin only, but I think that maybe there's something interesting here with some of these other coins.
Well, I think it's also, if you go back to what we talked about on our show about the Bitcoin conference in Miami and how, Jack Maller's presentation was so impactful. I think, a lot of what his presentation was about Strike being able to process transactions using Lightning as the payment rails. I think to some degree, it doesn't matter what currency you're holding or what currency the merchant wants to accept. At the end of the day, all you're doing is sending value from one place to the other. And, if you're holding dollars and you're in Australia and the Australian merchant wants to accept Australian dollars, then you can pay them over the Lightning Network using US dollars that immediately convert to Bitcoin, and then from Bitcoin to Australian dollars, instantaneously. So I think to your point, the more that these rails get built out and the more functionality gets embedded into the network, the more it's really not going to matter which currency you want to hold. It just matters what currency you want to spend and what currency whoever you're giving it to wants to accept.
I also think that as these doors are opened, I think you're going to see, well, there'll be a battle for what money people want to use most, what coin people want to use most, and I believe that a lot of those battles will be won by Bitcoin eventually because it is the best money without a doubt out of 15,000 cryptocurrencies that are there really is Bitcoin and everything else. A lot of people don't understand that exactly. They want to lump it in there, but if you really understand what Bitcoin does and what its potential is, it tends to eat everything. And I think that while Panama has opened the door here for Bitcoin and 8 others, I think that's very good for Bitcoin. I don't think is necessarily great for the 8 others long term because I think that Bitcoin will eventually win out. But even if it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
There doesn't have to be one winner. But
In this particular case, that paradigm shift is not dependent on Bitcoin. It's really dependent on saying, okay, we're going to take a different type of money, not necessarily a different currency, meaning digital money. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. The next headline was Fidelity is rolling out Bitcoin investing for 401k plans. So this was an interesting announcement. Fidelity announced that for 401k customers, they're going to allow those customers to put Bitcoin into their 401k. They would let any of the participants in that plan that's allowing Bitcoin to put, I think, up to 20% of their 401k dollars into Bitcoin, which I thought was kind of interesting too. I don't know if there are other restricted assets in that sense, like where they say, okay, you can put this in your 401k, but you can only have X% of it, in this asset. So I thought that in and of itself was a very interesting component to this announcement. But again, this to me is it is another step towards adoption where you've got a major financial institution, Fidelity, in terms of assets under management in 401k plans. I'm sure Fidelity is way up there. And so I see this as a move by a big player in the overall financial management space that is recognizing the fact that Americans want to own Bitcoin in their retirement plans.
Mm-hmm. So when I first saw this news, I thought it was huge. I was like, wow, this is really significant. Now that I've had a bit more time to digest it, I think some parts of it are very significant. And I think some parts, similar to what we were discussing before with like Central African Republic, make this more, I'm going to say like a bit of a drip. When I say by drip, I mean that, the road to Bitcoin adoption is going to be a lot of little drips, just a drop of water here, a drop of water here. And it's a lot of these little drops. There will be times someone will come along, maybe with, big bucket of water, maybe like, Mexico, which is possible that Mexico may adopt Bitcoin. That would be like a big bucket of water. But all these little drips eventually will fill, a 50-gallon barrel. And the thing about the Fidelity that they don't really talk about much in this is that Bitcoin will not be offered to everyone that has a Fidelity plan. The employers get to choose which plans their employees will see.
Right. And I think we saw that MicroStrategy already announced that they would offer it. The other thing I'm not sure of, I don't know if you know the answer to this, is really what form is that Bitcoin in? Is it is it exposure to Bitcoin? Is it actual Bitcoin? Could you at some point when you get to retirement age actually move those coins to cold storage? I don't know the answers to any of that. And so I think there's a lot of questions there that would need to be answered. But if it was the equivalent of you can now own grayscale Bitcoin in your 401k plan, that's not nearly as exciting as, you can DCA your 401k contributions into Bitcoin that's being held, in this place in cold storage would be far different than just having exposure to it.
Yeah, and I don't think this is not real Bitcoin. This is paper Bitcoin. And for a lot of people, that's okay if they just want exposure to the asset. It's not real Bitcoin. But, Fidelity is one of the largest companies of its type. They're certainly one of the largest companies that deal with 401ks and retirement accounts. I think they have 11 trillion, I'm sorry,
Yep.
under management. I mean, they're an 800-pound gorilla. They're an absolute monster. So the fact that that door has been opened, even if you're not expecting a flood coming through that door, a large flood of people doing it, I think is significant. It's not the kind of news that's going to make me really.
Yeah, it's not earth
mind
shattering.
blowing, but it is significant, and you have to have all these little drips along the way. You just have
Well,
to have these
again,
little
you've got
steps.
Fidelity is the one guy dancing in the field right now.
Hmm.
And, at some point, Vanguard or Schwab or whoever is going to have to recognize that and make a similar announcement. It's just somewhat inevitable. If there's nothing else about financial management firms, they are wildly competitive with one another because it's, to an extent, it's a commodity and a fee game, meaning that if you're an employer, there's really not a whole lot of a difference between one 401k plan provider and another. They're all going to offer the same or very similar investments or identical investments that might have different names. And so it's going to force a lot of other players in this space to keep up.
Yeah, and also once the first person's done it, the next one is not that difficult. It's not that difficult to get management to agree to do it if you can say, well, our biggest competitor is doing it. They're
Right.
doing it. Why don't we offer it? And what's the downside to us offering it? And there's a saying, pioneers take all the arrows. So Fidelity's the pioneer here. Whatever slings and arrows are going to come from this, they're going to deal with.
That's
and
right.
then the next person steps in there. It's a lot easier to be number two than it is to be number one.
Yeah. Well,
As
my favorite saying there is the early bird gets the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, do you have anything else on the Fidelity?
No, let's keep going. Goldman Sachs makes its first Bitcoin-backed loan.
I thought this was really interesting. I thought this was particularly interesting for a number of reasons. One, it's Goldman Sachs. So, there are a couple of names in the financial world that really carry a lot of weight. And I don't know if there's any name that carries as much weight as Goldman Sachs. They're certainly in that, elite category. And what I thought was really interesting about this was that they lent money using Bitcoin as the underlying asset, which is really kind of crazy because if anyone's ever applied for a mortgage or any kind of loan, you're put through the ringer. I don't care how good your credit is. I don't care how much money you've got. Getting a loan on any kind of asset is difficult, particularly a mortgage. I mean, I think a lot of people can relate to that. It's a lot of steps that you have to go through. So for Goldman Sachs, one of the biggest financial names in the world, extremely heavily regulated, to be a pioneer and to say that we're gonna offer a loan and the collateral for this loan is going to be Bitcoin. That's remarkable. That's something that when people talk about like what is Bitcoin worth? Well, according to Goldman Sachs, it's worth enough to use as collateral for a loan.
Well, so a couple of things there. First of all, is don't kid yourself. There are certainly there are potential margin calls on that loan based on the volatility of the price. So we don't know the terms of those loans, and the fact that Goldman Sachs did it, they didn't really disclose a whole lot of details about what they did, but there are plenty of other companies out there that are giving loans against Bitcoin. Our friends at Unchained are doing it every single day, and it's it wasn't viewed as a groundbreaking announcement when they did it, but like you said, for a legacy financial institution like Goldman Sachs to come out and say that they're doing it shows what I think you and I already know, which is that despite the price discovery that we're experiencing now in Bitcoin in general, and the fact that if you give a loan based on a certain amount of Bitcoin, it may not be worth the same tomorrow. It might be worth more or less. I think that what Goldman Sachs clearly did recognize is that in terms of quality of collateral, there's really not a whole lot better asset out there in terms of being able to attach to something and be able to know that outside of the fact that you've got price movement, that's just kind of part and parcel of where we are in the evolution of the technology. It's really solid collateral.
I think the term I like to use, pristine collateral. And so they see value in it. One of the things they said that I thought was interesting is that with this type of collateral, they have the ability to track its price 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So I'm guessing they have something set up where, if at 3 a.m. on a Saturday morning, the price dips below whatever your margin requirements are, there's going to be some kind of trigger, and they're going to want you to they're going to have very flexible margin calls, or I'm going to say very frequent margin calls, because they can do this on the fly 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So that's something that they brought up. We'll see that, like I said, there are other places to get a loan to use your Bitcoin as collateral. But I also think that's something that Michael Saylor has talked about, that you don't sell your Bitcoin, you just borrow against it.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're seeing one of a prestigious legacy financial institution saying not that they will do it, but they've done their first one.
Right. They didn't announce it because it's a one-off.
No, and look, they also put a press release out there for this. They could have done this quietly. They didn't have to get their PR team on this, but they did it for a reason. Why do you think that? What was their reason behind it, do you think?
You never know with somebody like Goldman Sachs. I could see a number of different reasons they're doing it, but I think, to me, it seems like they did it it was a marketing effort on their part, meaning that if somebody reads that and they own a lot of Bitcoin and they don't want to spend their Bitcoin, then maybe their next call is to Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, I mean, I thought this was just an ad for Goldman Sachs to
Yeah.
get more Bitcoin loans, to do more Bitcoin loans. Like, hey, we do this. And maybe for some people they say, well, if I'm doing it through, I'm going to use Unchained, even though I think Unchained is extremely reputable, and we've looked at what they're doing. We think it's good. It's not a recommendation. It's just, we have no reason to think anything would be an issue with Unchained. But maybe you have there are a lot of people who haven't heard of Unchained or some of the other places that let you borrow against your Bitcoin. But maybe you got a guy, I'm just going to make something up. He's 65 years old. He knows Goldman Sachs well, and he's got some Bitcoin he wants to borrow against. And this is, this prestigious financial institution. He trusts it, and we'll use that for it. So I think this is another drip, as we're talking about that. I think it's important. It's a different part of the ecosystem. But I think that the really amazing thing here is, we talk about this pristine collateral or great collateral. There are people that think Bitcoin is worthless. Actually, our next story is about Bitcoin being worthless. So let's kind of mix that one in here a bit.
Yeah, well, actually, that's our last story, but we can skip.
Okay. So, well, it's our next story and our last story.
Now it's our next story. We'll go back to the other one after this, because you had that great segue. So,
oh, okay, you're right. Yeah, well, it's okay. So, so here's something where we have Warren Buffett saying that he wouldn't buy all the Bitcoin in the world for $25, and it's just a hyperbolic, kind of silly statement.
yeah, and put it in a little context. The clip is widely available out on the internet, but the essential story was, Warren Buffett said if you offered him 1% of all of the farmland in the country, he'd write a check for $25 billion for that on the spot. If you offered him 1% of the rental housing market, he'd offer $25 billion for that instantly. But if you offered him all the Bitcoin in the world for $25, he wouldn't take it because it's worthless and he would have to sell it back to you at some point.
Yeah. So I think Warren Buffett, I learned a lot about investing from Warren Buffett, and I have a lot of respect for what Warren Buffett has done during his lifetime.
Yeah, I will say I have respect for Warren Buffett's ability to see value in certain investments. Um, his ongoing rhetoric about Bitcoin has kind of has eaten away at that a little bit, I think, over the past year or so, along with Charlie Munger, as his right hand, basically saying even more negative things about Bitcoin. To me, it's just, there are a number of things at play, but the biggest part of it is that there's just a general lack of understanding of what it is. So his argument is that he would buy the farmland and he would buy the rental properties because the properties generate rent and the farmland generates food, and Bitcoin is worthless because it's an asset that generates nothing. And while it may be technically correct that Bitcoin, it's not a company, it's not generating cash flow or creating value for shareholders because it's not a company. It doesn't have shareholders. And so he's viewing it through the lens of it's an investment like a stock. And the way I see it is that it's nothing like a stock. It's more like, to me, it's more like a platform than a company. It's more like the internet than it is like Google or Apple. So for him to, view it that way, meanwhile, the irony is not lost that, you're talking about a guy who is one of the biggest shareholders of Coca-Cola and is, on the stage here with his C's candies. Obviously he's made a lot of investments, but he's also investing in things that aren't necessarily moving society forward in a positive way.
Yeah, so I agree with all that, and I have some other thoughts on Warren Buffett. And one of the reasons that I wanted to include this article in here, besides the fact that there's been a lot of chatter about it, is that what one person thinks, or what two people think, or what a handful of people think, even if those people have been very successful in the past, it doesn't mean they're right and doesn't mean they know what they're talking about on this particular subject. So, something we've discussed on the show before, even early in this episode, is that I was really fascinated with the iPhone. I thought the iPhone was really going to change the world. It did, and I was invested in Apple pre-iPhone. I saw the keynote from Steve Jobs, and I said, if it actually does what he is claiming this is going to do, this is just going to change the world. They're going to sell a ton of these things. And they did. It did change the world.
Yeah.
So the iPhone came out, I believe it was June 29 or June 30, 2007. I'm going from memory. I know I'm close. And Warren Buffett did not invest in Apple for almost 9 years after the release of the iPhone. Warren Buffett did not get into Apple until the first quarter of 2016. Now, he had access to things I didn't have. I'm pretty sure that he knew Steve Jobs. In fact, I do know he knew Steve Jobs because I was reading something about how he tried to convince Steve Jobs to a stock buyback, and Steve Jobs said he wasn't interested. So it shouldn't take the person who's considered one of the world's greatest investors 9 years to figure out that Apple's a good investment. And you want to know the craziest part? What do you think Berkshire Hathaway's biggest holding is at this point?
I don't know.
It's Apple.
I was going to say probably Apple because they invested and then it's outperformed everything.
Well, it's not just that, but they put a lot into it. So Berkshire Hathaway, Apple's actually 40% of Berkshire Hathaway's portfolio. So when you talk about this guy, and I'm not knocking Warren Buffett, although I am knocking Warren Buffett.
No, you are.
But I'm saying that his history, he's 91 years old. His legacy is amazing. If there was a hall of fame for investing, he would be like, first round pick, right? He's getting in there on the first vote. But that doesn't mean that he gets everything right. And there's another weird thing about Warren Buffett. Do you know who Warren Buffett's best friend is? A really super close friend?
Bill Gates.
Bill Gates. They're bridge partners together. Do you know what stock Warren Buffett doesn't own in Berkshire Hathaway? Yeah. So I don't know if you know, but Microsoft's been a pretty good performer since the 80s.
Yeah.
Right? His friend was the CEO. I mean, it's not difficult to see the dominance that Microsoft had. And if you look at some of the other FANG stocks, meaning Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, Netflix, Google, or I'm sorry, I did A twice in there. So out of the FANG stocks, the only one that Warren Buffett owns is Apple. Now, those have been the best performing stocks by far for the past 10 years.
Mhm.
These are these almost monopolistic big tech firms. They've all had incredible returns, yet his next biggest holdings, and I have a list in front of me: Bank of America, Chevron, American Express, Coca-Cola, and Heinz, Kraft Heinz.
Hmm.
So, here's what I have to say: Warren Buffett doesn't understand technology. Warren Buffett is comfortable with consumer staples, banking, food. He does own Activision Blizzard. I don't know when he picked that up,
Yeah.
but his thing has been to buy on value, buy companies with a low multiple and hold on to them forever, basically. And that's where he's done really well. So when you ask a 91-year-old Warren Buffett, who has historically not been a very big advocate of technology, what he thinks about Bitcoin, you're asking the wrong question to the wrong person. It's really irrelevant what Warren Buffett thinks about Bitcoin. I can guarantee you he hasn't put 1,000 hours of study into it, and I can guarantee he hasn't put 100 hours of study into it. And it's
Yeah.
very
He just,
difficult to understand it without that.
right. And if you haven't studied it and you don't understand it, then I could see how you can. I mean, that's one of the first things that new people to Bitcoin have a hard time grasping is what makes it valuable, what gives it any value. You're talking about a token on a network that's being propagated by the guessing of random numbers. Like it's not something intuitive in any way. And I'm sure if you're 91 years old and averse to technology in general, there's no way you're going to understand it. And so rather than try to understand it or try to, talk to people who could help him understand it, he would just rather disparage it.
Right. And I like to pick apart one other thing he said too, which is basically that Bitcoin doesn't do anything. Technically,
Yeah.
it's wrong. I don't feel like correcting that part. But my question is, would he buy a Tom Brady rookie card for $25? Doesn't do anything. It's a piece of cardboard with a picture on the front. Doesn't, I mean, at least Bitcoin, you can argue there's a giant network there with security and all these other things that lets you move value across time and space. What does a Tom Brady rookie card do? What does a bar of gold do? Both those things don't do anything. It doesn't mean they don't have a lot of value. And I'll tell you that if Warren Buffett, and I know he's being hyperbolic, but if someone offered Warren Buffett a Bitcoin for $25, a whole Bitcoin,
Mhm.
guarantee he would buy it. And if he didn't, he's foolish. And the same goes for Tom Brady rookie card. If someone offered him a Tom Brady rookie card, which really doesn't do anything, for $25, he would buy it. He's talking to a group of people. I'm sure he made the room laugh. People like that. People discuss that. Although there's one part that I would like to also bring up is that we have a mutual friend who I was about a year ago talking to about Bitcoin. He thought it was really interesting and he was going to look into it. And I talked to him probably a couple weeks after that. And I said, what do you think about Bitcoin? Not interested.
Mhm.
He liked all the parts, but you know what he didn't like about it? Warren Buffett didn't like it, and he loves
Yeah.
Warren Buffett. And so he
Yeah.
let Warren Buffett change his mind on that. And Warren Buffett's a very influential person, but, Bitcoin's a bit unforgiving. And when you say silly things like this, it's going to go on your permanent record. And I just think I don't think this was a very deep, thoughtful answer he gave to anything, and it's kind of a silly answer. But for people that want to keep turning to Warren Buffett to get his blessing for investing in Bitcoin, it's probably never going to happen ever.
It's not. And that's one thing that, if you listen to what he said, it's just so obvious that he doesn't understand it, both from the standpoint of when he's comparing it to actual productive assets that generate, that are able to generate cash flow. I mean, that's the accounting definition of an asset, is something that provides a future benefit. You pay for it now and it gives you a future benefit down the road. That is not the same as a monetary asset. And forgetting the network for a minute, but when you're talking about the actual Bitcoin lowercase b, the actual asset, you're talking about money, and a dollar doesn't do anything. It has value because the government says it has value, and we're able to use it transactionally day in and day out. But if you put a dollar in a drawer and come back 100 years later, the dollar is going to be in the drawer. It's not going to make new dollars. And the same can be said for really any monetary asset. And if you don't really understand the nature of a monetary asset, you're just kind of talking about something different than what it is. And then on top of that, you really don't understand the network and the platform if you think that it doesn't do anything, because it clearly does a lot. And there's clearly, given the fact that it's the largest computer network with with an unbelievable amount of computing power behind it, and that it's able to store a self-audited accounting ledger for every transaction that's ever occurred since its inception. I have a really hard time saying that that's not doing anything.
Well, the not doing anything is silly, and there's so many things that have value that aren't doing anything. You could buy farmland, just land somewhere has value. It doesn't do anything. You can do things on it, just like you can do things on Bitcoin. But it's I just think this is a lot of silliness, and people want the blessing of what they consider to be experts.
Mm-hmm.
And realistically, I still think we're very early on in Bitcoin. People may think it's not that early on, but clearly the deeper you get, the more we realize it's very early on. And if you want the blessing from a Warren Buffett, I don't know who's another big investor, Peter Lynch, I'm just going to throw that out there. If you want blessings from these guys, or Jim Cramer on TV, you may get it, you may not get it. But anytime you're looking to invest your money somewhere, you need to be using your own judgment, your own research. You're going to have to put some time and effort into it. You can't just ask Warren Buffett a question, hope he gives it a blessing, or read something that Warren Buffett, all of a sudden Warren Buffett gives it a green light, and now Bitcoin's okay. It's no different than it was before he did it. And there's another thing, which is him and Charlie Munger have established their position. They do not like Bitcoin. They've called it rat poison. They've called it all kinds of things.
Evil, whatever all kinds of things, right?
It's not for them. Okay, that's fine. It doesn't have to be for you. There are almost 8 billion people on this planet. I think about 60% of the planet is unbanked, right? We view things in terms
70.
of, is it 70? It's an enormous number.
It's a lot.
Billions of people. And, it provides a lot of benefit to people in poor countries. This is probably one of the reasons we're seeing the poorer countries adopt it. So another silly statement, and I think we can just leave it at that, is that it's a silly statement, but couple that with the fact that it is technology, and Warren Buffett is not known for being very good at technology.
Right.
And it's that simple to me.
All right. So let's go now to our last story, which is this one, which another baby step here, but I think an interesting one. So Fort Worth, Texas. We've both spent a lot of time in Fort Worth. Is the first city in the U.S. to mine Bitcoin and will run mining rigs out of City Hall. And there you can see in the picture the 3 S9s that are now running at Fort Worth City Hall's IT server room. So again, not anything earth-shattering or groundbreaking in the world of Bitcoin, but at the same time, you've got a municipality saying that we believe in this enough to the point where we're going to put these machines in place. and we're going to run them, and we're going to put some Bitcoin on the balance sheet of our city.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of this story. I really don't know what to make of it. I thought it was a when I first read the headline, I thought it was really cool. And then as I got deeper, you realize it's only 3 machines. These machines were donated to them by
They're old
somebody.
machines.
They're old. The thing I thought was maybe the most interesting that came out in their release was that they're saying that each of the machines will consume the same amount of energy as a household vacuum cleaner. So that was something they made sure to put in there, and I thought that was pretty interesting because, there's a lot of talk about Bitcoin and energy
Yeah.
use, and so I like them putting that out there that, okay, no one would have an issue with you running a vacuum cleaner. Everyone has a vacuum, and that this is the type of energy these things will burn. Once the story's out of the headlines, no one's going to care in a couple of days. It is another drip, in my opinion, of just moving forward. We're seeing all these things. I guess what I mean by that is we're seeing a lot of things go from Bitcoin just being asked like, what value does this have? Sort of that Warren Buffett story, to seeing local governments, even nationalities, putting value into it. And all these things are just saying is that there's something real to Bitcoin, that this isn't just kind of some weird thing that's out there, that you're just going to see all these kind of crazy adoptions in all these places. And it's easier for smaller municipalities and smaller countries to adopt it and do these kind of things. And so Fort Worth, I guess, I don't know if Fort Worth is because they wanted to be in the news. I don't think so. I think someone was just willing to give them 3 machines, and
Yeah,
they thought it'd be
but
kind of interesting.
yeah, here's one kind of tangent I'll go off on this one, which is something I've been thinking a lot about lately, is that I do think a lot of adoption that we're going to see is going to happen in much smaller venues. And so I really think that, and Fort Worth is not a small city. I think it's like the 12th biggest city in the country or something like that. It's definitely in the top 20. Um, and so it's not a tiny city, but it's a smaller town especially in terms of Texas. But when you look at smaller localities that are putting these things into place, it really gives people the ability to have exposure to it at kind of a grassroots level. It brings it closer to you in terms of day to day interoperability with it. Like the fact that it's legal tender in El Salvador doesn't really do anything for you unless you want to go to El Salvador and use Bitcoin. I mean, if you're from El Salvador, obviously it impacts you, but there's a remoteness to it. And then when you talk about anywhere else, Africa or Portugal or whatever, if you're in the average American town, the adoption of Bitcoin as legal tender somewhere far away doesn't really do anything for you in terms of getting it or wanting to adopt it. But as you see smaller towns and cities and counties, whatever, start to view Bitcoin as something that they want to mine, that they want to hold on their balance sheet, that they want to accept for payment, especially if it's for public payments, for taxes. I think all of those things are meaningful in terms of adoption moving forward.
Yeah, I agree completely. It, you know, it's just not going to be a country like Switzerland saying, okay, we've been a banking capital for 250 years, and the entire country of Switzerland now is going to make Bitcoin legal tender. You're just not going to see it. Now, we saw Lugano in Switzerland, one of their bigger cities, has adopted it. And I agree that it's got to start these smaller municipalities, these
Because
smaller
then
areas.
what I think happens, and Fort Worth might be an example of that, if they create some level of awareness within the city of Fort Worth, and people are encouraged in some way. I don't know if they'll have any incentive to use it or what, but if there is some incentive created or some ability to use Bitcoin on a more regular basis, um, it makes you more passionate about it, in the sense that you might then want to talk to your local politician about it. And when you talk to your local politician, maybe they get some, sense that there's a desire for it to be a bigger part of the conversation, and that expands to your county government or your state government. And so I think, it's these little grassroots efforts that over time are going to all add up to really being able to affect some of the policy changes that need to happen in order for it to, actually evolve as a monetary asset and a currency.
Yeah, and I think all these little steps, I think, go a long way to doing that. They may not seem like they're changing the world, but when they're the first city government to mine Bitcoin. So that's news. The second city government that mines Bitcoin, because there will be another city in the US that's going to mine Bitcoin. I'd even bet you it happens in this year, before the end of the calendar year 2022. It wouldn't even be shocking. And that's
Yeah.
the point. And then the third one may also come along this year too, because everyone is looking for a way. Mining Bitcoin is a profitable venture at this
Right.
juncture.
I mean, even if you're running three S9s in a server room, I think it said in the article I read that they expect it to be profitable. It'll at least pay for its energy use. So when people see that opportunity, there are going to be people that are going to want to take it. So again, I think this week we saw a lot of small but significant things happening in the Bitcoin space, and taking one at a time. Maybe they're not individually that big, but all these things add up.
They do, and we're seeing a lot of things in a lot of different areas of adoption, and most of it isn't really hitting Main Street in any way. Meaning, you're not really going to touch it or feel it. You're not going to see it if you go to a store. But knowing what's happening, it's not just in the US, it's around the world, that these little steps, little by little, are being taken. And you could only take so many little steps before you're at the other side of the room.
Mm-hmm.
It may take a while, but there is no doubt that Bitcoin is moving forward, and it's starting to be adopted by more and more governments. So this week, we had it. If we just take a look at the news this week, we had 3 governments accepting Bitcoin, right? Central African Republic, Panama, although the Panama thing is not complete yet, and Fort Worth. And then we had 2 of the largest financial institutions in the country, the world for that matter, also do their own little part to adopt it.
Mm-hmm.
And something I like to use, we talked about it earlier, is like that 7-year test. If someone had told you in 2015 that Goldman Sachs was going to issue loans based on Bitcoin being collateral, or that Fidelity was going to let you buy Bitcoin in your 401k, or that even Fort Worth would put Bitcoin mining computers in their server room of City Hall to mine Bitcoin, those would all be kind of mind-blowing in 2015. Crazy. And actually, I wonder what year would they be crazy in your opinion if it was 2000, if it was 5 years ago, 2017, not 2015?
I would argue it could have been crazy as recently as 2019,
I would agree.
2018.
So these things, we're it depends on expectations and the view you see them from, but there are really significant steps happening in the world of Bitcoin, and a lot of it is infrastructure that's being built out before the masses really get to it. Just shows you just how early on we are. But I think the news this week was really, when viewed as a whole, a great week for Bitcoin.
Agreed. All right.
Anything else you want to add in before it's time to wrap this up?
No, I think that was it for me.
Excellent. All right. Can you tell people where they can find us, please?
Yes. You can come to our website, btcbutlers.com, Twitter at btcbutlers. You can email us at info@btcbutlers.com. If you are interested in putting an inheritance plan in place for your Bitcoin, or if you want to implement any of the Bitcoin best practices as far as buying, storing, and running your own node, we can certainly help you with any of those things. We'd love to hear from you, and we will continue to talk about the weekly Bitcoin news, and reach out, subscribe, either on YouTube or wherever you hear your podcasts, and hope to hear from you soon.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Talk to you
Talk to you
soon.
soon.